Hi, I'm Mark Anthony, and welcome to the NDE Zone, connected by the light from the cosmic to the subatomic. The truth is that from the dawn of recorded history, there have been documented accounts of communication with the other side. And this communication comes in several different forms. It can be a visitation, where you catch a glimpse of a loved one out of your peripheral vision. Or perhaps you have a dream and it's so realistic that you've talked to a deceased loved one that you wake up feeling that it's real. And this has been termed after-death communication. Other times, the contact with the other side can be through a medium like myself. Then there are near-death experiences. And the new frontier of afterlife research is deathbed visions and shared death experiences, where more than one person engages in observing a spirit leave the material world and transition to the other side. Spirit communication is part of the human experience. The problem is, historically, it has been dismissed as fantasy or feared as paranormal or supernatural. Then, of course, there are the skeptics who use science to negate spirit contact. And this brings me to one of my favorite figures in history, Sir Isaac Newton. And he was a superstar of science and the shining star of the Enlightenment in the 18th century. Newton's extremely impressive. While self-quarantined during the plague of 1665, he invented calculus. And I think high school students have been cursing him ever since. But then he also explored the laws of optics and developed the laws of gravity. So Newton, in many aspects, created the field of study that we now know as physics. However, this also led to the development of what's known as Newtonian reductive materialism. Let's take this one step at a time. Materialism, that's the belief that the only thing that can be proven to exist is matter. Reductive means that physical matter is made of molecules which are composed of atoms. Everything that exists is a mix of matter and energy, and it all operates according to physical laws. Reality is what is observable, objective, and reproducible. And Newtonian reductive materialists believe that the supernatural does not exist. Neither do spirits, the afterlife, or God. Well, this may be the side effect of Newton's work, but this leads me to what I call the Newton paradox. Why? Because Newton believed in God, but he didn't believe in a soul or an afterlife. And he spent more time studying the Bible, seeking hidden messages and encrypted codes throughout the Bible than he did in studying science. And I find this fascinating for a guy who essentially invented physics, not to mention calculus, the laws of optics, and the laws of gravity. And then Newton said, atheism is so senseless. When I look at the solar system, I see the Earth at the right distance from the sun to receive the proper amounts of heat and light. This did not happen by chance. So from Newton's time onward, for the next 3 centuries, people of faith and people of science were split into 2 camps. People of faith looked at the scientific community as a group of heretical, blasphemous atheists, whereas people of science looked at those of faith as nothing more than hanging on to primitive, superstitious, mythological belief systems. But the walls between the two camps began to erode, particularly in 1875 with the foundation of the Theosophical Society, the two primary founders being Helena Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott. And what's fascinating about the Theosophical Society is they said, okay, yeah, there's Newton and there's faith, but let's look at all of it. Let's look at the big picture. And so the Theosophical Society combined the study of faith, philosophy, and science, and presented an open-minded forum for understanding consciousness and perception beyond the physical. Then things continued to progress until the 1960s, and in 1967, Dr. Ian Stevenson founded the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. And this was groundbreaking because for the first time, we had scientists who applied the scientific method of objective observation of phenomena related to consciousness surviving physical death. Then by the mid-1970s, Dr. Raymond Moody developed the term near-death experiences. Near-death experiences, also known as NDEs, occur when somebody physically dies and their consciousness leaves the body, and then they return to life with tales of entering a transcendent realm, encountering deceased loved ones, all sorts of amazing information. And for thousands of years, near-death experiences have been reported. It is believed the Apostle Paul talked about, I know a man who was caught up in the third heaven. And it is often believed that the Apostle Paul very well may have been writing about his own near-death experience. Similarly, Plato in the Republic talks about a warrior named who died, and his body was put on a funeral pyre, and they're about to light it, and he comes back to life and begins talking about a transcendent realm and reincarnation and many things that were not part of the ancient Greco and eventually Roman religions. So these things had been documented for millennia, and nobody knew what to call these mysterious resurrections. And that's when Dr. Raymond Moody stepped in and developed the term near-death experiences, which led to the foundation of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. John Audette, Dr. Ken Ring, Dr. Bruce Grayson, Dr. Michael Sabone got together at the University of Virginia following upon the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, and they began to objectively study the survival of consciousness, the afterlife, and these resurrections, which now had a name known as near-death experiences. It is my belief, based on my research, my life's work, being a psychic medium, that survival of consciousness, near-death experiences, and spirit communication are real and can be explained through science. Understanding these phenomena begins with the perception of light. That's one of the reasons I entitled this presentation, The NDE Zone, Connected by the Light from the Cosmic to the Subatomic. Let's start with the basics with light. Life as we know it depends on light. Think about it. If it weren't for the light of the sun, then plants would not grow. And plants take the light energy and through a process known as photosynthesis, turn light into nutrients. Animals eat plants, humans eat plants, and animals who eat plants. Every form of life on this planet depends on consuming something which is affected by light. I even had in an interview one time on the X Zone, Rob McConnell, he always likes throwing tough questions. He goes, well, what about mushrooms? Mushrooms that grow in the dark. Yes, but mushrooms are a fungus and they feed on things like trees and other decaying material, which grew because of light. So even mushrooms, their existence in one form or another depends on light. Every great spiritual teacher describes God in terms of light. Think about it. The ancient Egyptians talked about the light. The Hindus, Krishna talked about the light. Buddha talked about the light. Zoroaster talked about the light. Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, St. Francis of Assisi, Yogananda Paramahansa. Every great spiritual teacher describes God in terms of the light. Now, let's take this on a more practical level. How many of you have ever been looking in a mirror, maybe at home in your bathroom or somewhere else? You look in a mirror and you thought for a second you saw a spirit. How many people have observed a comet, and when you try to look at it directly, you have a hard time? You sort of have to look off to the side and see the comet in your peripheral vision. What about catching a glimpse of a spirit in your peripheral vision? Then you turn and the spirit vanishes. In fact, the other day, I have a neighbor. She knows I'm a medium, and her daughter sadly died about a year and a half ago. She ran across the street to me and she said, "Mark, I could swear I saw my daughter. I saw her out of the corner of my eye and I turned and she vanished. So she's gone. She doesn't want to come to me." I said, "No, that's not it. She is with you. It's just that when you turn to look at her directly, you were no longer able to perceive her." And she said, "Why?" Well, all of these phenomenon can be explained on the structure of the human eye. The human eye has rods and cones. Let me start with cones are at the center of the retina. And cones are best for daytime vision, for details, and for seeing all the really intricate things, colors, details that we zero in on, that we hyper focus on. Whereas rods are extremely light sensitive, and they are on the outer rim of the retina. And so rods are best for night vision. So this is why astronomers and pilots have come up with the term averted vision. And that's a technique where you look to one side to expose the most light sensitive part of your eye to better see faint objects. In other words, next time there's a comet and you want to see it, go outside, you can locate it, and then don't look at it directly. Look to the side and observe the comet in your peripheral vision. It's the same thing in paranormal investigations, or when you feel the spiritual presence, try to resist the opportunity to look directly at the spirit, because there's such subtle light. Light is a form of electromagnetic energy, and you've got to pick up on the subtle patterns. It's also fascinating, you know how in art, culture, movies, and in personal descriptions, many times talk about spirits as being, faded and black and white. And that's because the rods in your eye don't detect color, and things appear in the grayscale, black and white. So let's look at the electromagnetic spectrum. Within the electromagnetic spectrum, which is energy, there are several different types of EM, electromagnetic energy: radio waves, microwaves, infrared, white light, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays. And as you can see from the graphic, see where the triangle is, and then below the triangle is an expanded view of that. What we're able to see with the naked eye is such a small percentage of the electromagnetic spectrum, and that's visible light. But light is electromagnetic energy, and we know from the laws of physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It is only transferred from one form to another. So, by the late 19th and early 20th century, a new branch of physics expands. We can't fault Sir Isaac Newton for not knowing this, because the technology of his day did not enable anyone to examine things beyond the atomic level. So thanks to quantum physics, we know that everything is made of molecules, which are made of atoms, which are made of smaller particles known as protons, neutrons, and electrons. And those in turn are made of an even smaller particle, a quantum, which is electromagnetic energy. Okay, for the physics buffs, yes, an electron is a quantum particle because an electron is smaller than its neutrons and protons. But the truth of the matter is that on the subatomic level, everything is made of electromagnetic energy. So that means this pen that I'm holding is made of electromagnetic energy. But then again, so am I. So is the air that I'm breathing. So is the light that we're all seeing. So are the radio waves that are transmitting this broadcast. And on the subatomic level, there is no difference between physics and biology. Traditionally, science was split into two fields: biology, the study of living organisms, and physics, the study of inorganic matter. But when you go to the subatomic level, everything is made of electromagnetic energy known as quanta. We now know through advances in quantum physics that everything has a vibration, which I was just explaining with the example of the pen and how everything is electromagnetic energy. But things in our universe are constantly in motion, vibrating. Even objects like this pen that appear to be stationary are in fact vibrating, oscillating, resonating at various frequencies. And as such, at every scale, all of nature, all of creation vibrates. And I'm quoting Tam Hunt and Jonathan Schooler from the University of California in Santa Barbara. And what we need to understand is that frequency is the rate at which vibrations occur. So obviously, the vibrational frequency of an inanimate object like a pen is going to be on a much lower scale than a living object. This brings us now to neuroscience, which is the study of the brain. It's been said that the brain is a carbon-12 and salt resonator floating in water, but it has an electromagnetic field. The official position of neuroscience is that the brain creates consciousness through chemical reactions and electrical impulses, but neuroscientists can't explain how. A friend of mine, Dr. Evan Alexander, he wrote the book Proof of Heaven to describe his near-death experience. And he said to me, he said, you know, Mark, in a brain about neuroscience, there's maybe 800 or 900 pages about functions of the brain, but maybe a paragraph, possibly two, about consciousness. And the reason for that is that science cannot explain how this carbon-12 and salt resonator floating in water creates consciousness. So what are we? What are we? Think of your body like a car. Now, some cars are really hot. And you look at that car and you say, man, I'd really like to jump on top of that car and go for a ride. And others, not so much. The truth is, we're not these bodies. We are energy, which is referred to as consciousness in the fields of psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy. In the realm of faith, it is referred to as soul or spirit. This is what makes us unique, and it includes our personality, observations, memories, knowledge, and love. Consciousness is pure energy. It pre-exists the body, comes into the body, and then lives on after physical death, meaning that it is eternal. Consciousness is capable of perception that far exceeds the scope of our 5 physical senses of sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Consciousness is capable of perceiving and communicating with other dimensions beyond our material world. Albert Einstein: matter is energy. Energy is light. We are all light beings. Fascinating. As usual, Einstein was on point, and he got it. On the subatomic level, we are quanta. Quanta is energy, is electromagnetic energy. We are all light beings. In recent years, quantum physicists like Professor Hans-Peter Dor at the Max Planck Physics Institute in Germany, and think about this, who could possibly be more serious than a German quantum physicist? And he said, the brain is like a computer hard drive. When the hard drive dies, we do not lose the information, this consciousness. The body dies, but the spiritual quantum field continues. In this way, we are immortal. Meanwhile, across the channel, Sir Roger Penrose stated, consciousness derives from quantum vibrations within the brain's neurons. In the spiritual sense, consciousness has been here all along. Now, I don't mean to insult my colleagues. I love these guys. I think they're absolutely fantastic, and they're also absolutely right on point. So let's look at physics and let's look at faith. Physics teaches us energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. Faith teaches us that the soul, the spirit, pre-exists the body and lives on after physical death. The brain does not create consciousness. It merely hosts it the way Professor Dorr says a computer hard drive hosts the programs on it. And based on my observations, my research, my lifetime work as a psychic medium, this is what led me to develop the term the electromagnetic soul, the EMS. And this is my 21st century term to describe what we really are, that our soul spirit is pure consciousness, which is eternal electromagnetic energy. And when my book was reviewed by some of the top near-death experience and afterlife researchers in the world, Dr. Gary Schwartz from the University of Arizona called me up and he said, Mark, he goes, you nailed it. 25 years ago, I came up with a term called the electromagnetic dynamical system of mind, body, brain interact. He goes, you nailed it. Electromagnetic soul. That's what it is because it encompasses both science and faith. So let's throw a bone now to the Newtonian reductionist materialists. Okay, if that's true, why not just use technology like an EEG, an electroencephalogram, or a QEEG, a quantitative electroencephalogram, to identify the electromagnetic soul? As you can see from the picture here, an EEG is when doctors, they hook up probes to your brain to measure the electrical activity within it. Well, EEG and QEEG are extremely useful for medical research and diagnosis, but they're neither sensitive enough nor designed to identify the electromagnetic soul, much less tune into the afterlife frequency. I mean, the fact is, they're great diagnostic tools for what they do, but they're not designed to be a soul detector or a spirit communication device. And as Professor Shelley Renee Joy of the California Institute of Integral Studies has said, it is entirely feasible that there are specific ranges of harmonic frequencies that interact with mind-brain systems through resonance at far higher frequencies than currently supposed. In other words, the diagnostic equipment that we're using simply isn't sensitive enough or designed to tune into these ultra high frequencies that exceed normal brain functioning. After-death communication, mediumship, deathbed visions, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, shared death experiences. These are all forms of interdimensional communication, which occurs when the vibration of the electromagnetic soul aligns with the higher vibration of the afterlife frequency. In my new book, The Afterlife Frequency, and in this talk, I want to point out that historically, after-death communication, mediumship, deathbed visions, out-of-body experiences, NDEs, SDEs, have all been treated as separate phenomenon and studied separately. It's time for that to end. We have to start studying these based on their commonalities and and how they're all very, very similar, and they all operate on the same principles. Now, how does interdimensional communication happen? Well, this now brings us to quantum entanglement. And astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was not only an astronaut Navy pilot, but an aeronautical engineer and UFOologist, and the founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, he explained quantum entanglement that when subatomic matter is in a process together, subsequently, the subatomic particles go apart from each other and across the universe. When they do this, they will remain entangled. This means if you do something to one, the other responds immediately, instantaneously. And recently, quantum physicists have said that quantum entanglement, even if two subatomic particles separate and are 1 billion miles apart, they're still entangled. You do something to one, and the other responds immediately. So, how does this tie into interdimensional communication? Well, remember when I was talking just moments ago about the EMS, the electromagnetic soul, which is pure quantum electromagnetic energy. In my last book, Evidence of Eternity, I introduced the concept of frequency beacons, the two-way street of interconnectedness. I expand upon it in my new book, The Afterlife Frequency. Think of everyone that you know, both in this world and in spirit, as being connected to you by a three-dimensional spider web. Now, let's take the spider out of it because it freaks out a lot of people. But how does the spider know something's in the web? Well, a fly or some other insect hits it, and there's a vibration along that web that alerts the spider. It's the same thing in spirit communication. For those of you who are parents, how many of you have suddenly got this feeling, oh my gosh, something's happened to my child, and you didn't get a cell phone call or hear about it from any physical means, you just know. And then you find out that you were right. And sometimes it's a good thing, but there's this connection. Do you think that that is just a fluke? Do you think that's just a coincidence? No, that's quantum entanglement. And a frequency beacon occurs when, let's say, a loved one has died, because when spirits leave this world, their vibrations are a lot higher, and they're no longer burdened by the physicality of a body and the slow vibration of a physical body. So their vibration's a lot more rapid. So let's say you're grieving the spirit of a loved one very heavily, and all of a sudden you feel that person's presence. Well, what's happened is you've sent a vibration, a frequency beacon along that energetic connection. You ever been driving in your car and suddenly you say, I need to turn on the radio, and you turn it on and there's that song? Wow, that just hits your heartstrings. Or have you ever been someplace and all of a sudden you smell that familiar scent? Maybe it's your grandfather's pipe smoke, your mother's perfume, and there's no source for either of those. That's a frequency beacon, because spirits can emit a vibrational frequency to you. They can activate a memory. They can draw your attention to something. Like every time I see a cardinal, a bird, I think of my son. Well, your son's spirit didn't turn into a cardinal, but a spirit can direct a cardinal there or direct your attention to it. And so that's why I call this the two-way street of interconnectedness. Well, it doesn't just apply in spirit communication, like mediumship or visitations. It also applies in near-death experiences. One of the side effects, or rather the after effects of an NDE, is when people return from the near-death experience, they talk about interconnectedness. We're all interconnected. What did Jesus talk about? We are all brothers and sisters. What did Buddha talk about? We are all brothers and sisters. When you start getting onto a higher spiritual plane, you realize that everything and everyone is connected. And that is what quantum physics proves. And that is also how and why spirits are able to send us messages and how we're able to detect their presence. So, where does this happen? Here's a diagram of our material world dimension. Here we are on planet Earth with our lower, slower vibration. Here is the afterlife frequency of the other side dimension. Think of us as living in AM radio. Think of the other side as FM radio. Two energetic systems that are existing parallel. But what happens? Interdimensional communication, near-death experiences, shared death experiences, deathbed visions, after-death communication occur when the two systems overlap. There's a frequency alignment, and that is what I call the NDE zone. Think about it. What does a medium do? A medium raises vibration to touch the afterlife frequency. A near-death experience, think of your EMS is like on a rubber band, and it's getting pulled right to the threshold of going. And if it didn't, you'd keep going, and it wouldn't be a near-death experience. It would be a death experience. All of these things involve an overlap of frequency. Now let's look at the practical aspects of this. In the 20th century, and now we're really expanding upon this in the 21st, brainwave frequencies were discovered. It was discovered that there's electrical activity in the brain, which changes depending on what you're doing. The brainwave frequency of someone sleeping is very different than someone who is awake. And as technology advances, this has yielded greater understanding of exactly what brainwaves represent and what they indicate about a person's health and state of mind. All right, so let's make this easy. We have 5 different brainwave frequencies: gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. Each one of them are extremely important. Gamma, okay, that's when you're really heightened perception. Think of Ken Jennings or Matt Amodio on Jeopardy. Okay, these guys are rapid fire thinking, accelerated, a state of concentration. That is when you are just revving it up. Now, beta, that's our normal everyday awake state. This is what, you hear your alarm in the morning, you get up, you brush your teeth, you tie your shoes, you go to work, you're able to function in the material world. Then alpha, the reason I depicted alpha as sort of slower, that's when you're physically and mentally relaxed. I call alpha the groovy baby state. Okay, that's when you just start, you start to relax. You can also begin to meditate, and that's when your brain begins to generate alpha waves, as opposed to the more I don't want to say frenetic, but the higher vibrational frequency of beta and gamma. Then there's theta. Theta is reduced consciousness. That's the dream state. And that's why I put in the graphic to where it flows much more calmly. Then there's delta. Now, a lot of people have been crashing on delta. Oh, well, there's not much going on there. No, delta is very important too. It's dreamless sleep. It's loss of bodily awareness, but that's also when your body repairs itself. This is when the cells go to work, when your immune system kicks in. So delta certainly is very important. Now, the reason that I have the pink arrow between alpha and theta is because in studies conducted on psychic research, myself included, I've been studied a number of times, it is on the alpha theta border where psychic activity occurs. And what's going on here is all of a sudden between alpha and theta, there's this receptive state. Spirits can see this. And that's why so many people have dreams where a loved one comes and talks to them. And it's different than the surrealistic nonsense or quality of a typical dream. A visitation has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It feels real. You wake up going, oh my God, I really did talk to my father. Want to know why? Because you did. And it's interesting to note that historically people tend to believe a visitation of a loved one in a dream more than, let's say you're at work and you say, the spirit of my Aunt Betty is standing next to the water cooler. Okay, people are going to look at you like you're crazy. But if you tell people, I had this dream and I really think Aunt Betty talked to me and it seemed very, very real. Let's take the Bible. How many stories in the Bible involve the dream state where spirits have come and given people prophetic messages? Like the three wise men being warned that Herod's crazy and is out to kill the baby Jesus. And then Joseph, the father or stepfather of Jesus, is warned to take Mary and Jesus out away from Herod into the land of Egypt. I'm just giving two examples there. There's also Jacob's ladder. There's Pharaoh and Pharaoh's dreams being interpreted by Joseph. And that's just the Bible. Every religious text in the world has this. So why is it, though, that a medium can go from beta to alpha theta in a few seconds when normally it takes people hours in the sleep state to get their brainwave frequency on that alpha theta border? And that's what researchers are still trying to understand. Why is it that psychics and mediums can go right to alpha theta voluntarily and while in the beta state? We go from beta to alpha theta rapidly. Well, let's look at the physiology. For those of you who study yoga and spirituality, we know that we have 7 chakras. The chakras were developed by Hindus nearly 5,000 years ago. What's fascinating about chakras is that there are 7 chakras, 7 main chakras, and they align with our 7 endocrine glands. I have to be facetious for a second. I was a criminal defense lawyer, and I can tell you that too many of my criminal clients spent way too much focus on the red chakra, which is related to the reproductive glands. But I digress. But let's talk about the 2 chakras that are involved with spirit communication. That is the solar plexus, which is aligned and associated with the endocrine gland known as the pancreas, and the pineal gland, the so-called third eye chakra, which is behind the center of our forehead. The pineal gland, as you can see from this diagram, it's a small gland about 4 to 5 inches behind the center of the forehead. And it's about the size, it can range anywhere from a grain of rice, sometimes to a small lima bean. Well, there was a British-Israeli study, and then a British-German study, and then a French-Israeli study in recent years. And the British in particular detected calcite and magnetite crystals within the pineal gland. Interesting. The pineal gland is one of the most mysterious and misunderstood glands in the human body and is still being studied extensively. What we do know about it is that it secretes hormones that affect the reticular activating system. It also regulates your brainwave patterns. So we have an electrical field in your brain. We got crystals in the pineal gland. It regulates brain waves. It also controls your circadian rhythms, such as your body temperature, sleep cycles, activity levels, digestion. Circadian rhythms tell you when to get up in the morning, when to work, when I'm hungry, when I'm, your moods. That's also what causes jet lag. People wonder, well, gosh, I slept on the plane, but I still feel tired, because your circadian rhythms are geared to, let's say you're in Eastern time zone, and all of a sudden you fly to Great Britain, and there's a 5-hour time change. It takes time for your body's circadian rhythms to adjust to that. And then here we go, light perception. Once again, we get back to light. The pineal gland governs our ability to perceive light. And is it just physical light that it governs our perception? Now, think about this. The first radios were a piece of crystal where copper wire was running low levels of electricity through it. So we have in our head the pineal gland, which is a much more sophisticated version of this. In essence, we have a communication system in our brain. Now, this brings us next to the other psychic chakra, if you will, the solar plexus. And the reason it's called the solar plexus is because the resemblance between the radial network of nerves and ganglion and the rays of the sun. In other words, it's here in the pit of your stomach, and all the ganglion spread out like the rays of the sun. There's a link between gut feelings and intuitive knowledge. It's always funny when I'm doing seminars, I'll ask the crowd, all right, how many people here have women's intuition? Of course, everyone's hand goes up. Or if I just say intuition, the women will admit to it. Okay, with guys, you got to say, how many guys have gut instinct? All right, then the guys, because gut instinct, that's very Chris Pratt, Harrison Ford, Denzel Washington. All right, guys, we got that gut instinct. Okay, the thing is, we're just as psychic as our female counterparts. It's just that women are more open to examining and expressing their feelings. And when you look at it anatomically, the solar plexus is a connection of two bundles of nerves or ganglion that intertwine in a central location in the abdomen. It is the largest and most complex nerve center outside of the brain. In fact, Dr. David Wingate of the University of London and Dr. Michael Gershorn of Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York City have actually referred to the solar plexus as the second brain. So, in my experience, when people get that feeling something's wrong with my son, or there's a bad feeling coming, it is the solar plexus that detects intuitive, emotional, and physical vibrations. It is the pineal gland that detects the data, the information, the voices, the more specific or the more verifiable type of information. So ergo, we have two psychic receptor centers in our body. Now, mediums are like telephones through which spirit communication takes place. Interdimensional communication through a medium appears to be or is a form of telepathy. And what happens here is the spirit vibrates frequency to the medium. The vibration is then translated by the brain into recognizable information by the medium. All right, let's make this easy. So, in a mediumistic reading, think of this triangle. The medium and the client, here we are on planet Earth, and then the afterlife frequency, the collective consciousness of spirits. So when a medium connects with the afterlife frequency, then the spirits emit frequency to the medium, and that goes into the medium's head and gets translated and converted into recognizable concepts based on the medium's feelings, memories, and cultural associations. The medium then conveys that to the client, and the client is able to verify that information. Also, the client is extremely important because it is the client who draws the spirits into the reading. So when things are going really well, you have this beautiful flow of energy. But what can happen is if the client is extremely emotionally upset, that's why we always recommend don't do a reading immediately after the death of a loved one, not because the spirit can't communicate, but because people are just upset and their intense grief and emotions is creating a barrier. Or if the client isn't getting it and doesn't understand the metaphor and expects it all to be texting and instant messaging, and they start saying no to everything, it's what I call the no syndrome, and it creates an energetic block. So there's reasons that sometimes the readings work better, sometimes they don't. But what about people who aren't mediums? The truth is, everybody is capable of experiencing interdimensional communication, whether or not they're a medium. Why? Because we all have a pineal gland and a solar plexus. And a lot of my colleagues, they have these classes, I'll turn you into a medium. Well, not everyone's going to turn into a medium. I mean, it's like, look, I can swim, but I am never going to win gold medals at the Olympics. Okay, I can teach, I can go for tennis lessons, but I'm not going to become a Jehovic or a Serena Williams. We're all good at doing different things, but that doesn't mean we can't all have the experience. So I was trying to figure out, how do I explain this to people who aren't mediums? So when I was working on my book, I hit the dreaded writer's block. I couldn't figure out anything. So I thought, all right, fine. I'm going to go for a walk on the beach. I live near the ocean. So I left my home and I started walking toward the ocean. All of a sudden, I got this tingly sensation, and I did an about face, and I went to this bike path near my house. So I'm walking down the bike path, and suddenly I see these two objects shining in the light. And I walk up to them, and it's a nickel and a penny. And, you know, both of my parents have passed on. Both of my parents were very gifted mediums. My dad was a Navy SEAL. My mom was a commercial illustrator. You know, we were sort of the family next door, kind of. Okay. You know, I'm the first one that ever went public with my abilities. So I go to pick up this nickel and the penny, and all of a sudden I hear my mom's voice. If they're not heads up, don't pick it up. And I started laughing because my mom's family was Italian, and they have a superstition for everything. Don't cross your silverware. Don't walk under a ladder. Watch out for, you know, and I started laughing. And then I hear my dad's voice say, it's money, grab it. So I pick up this nickel and this penny, and I'm holding it in my hand, and I'm looking, I go, oh, 6 cents. 6 cents. And I realized something bigger was going on here, and these chills went through me. And I said, okay, the reason I'm getting cold chills and tingles, and that's why a lot of people think spirit communication is scary, is because when you get cold chills and tingles, when you're engaging in the flight or fight response. That's why when people are doing paranormal investigations, they get chills, they think, oh, everything's scary. No, that's the electromagnetic soul, the EMS of a spirit interfacing with your EMS, and the physiological response is cold chills and tingles. And then in my mind's eye, I saw my dad standing in the ocean up to his waist, holding this blue canvas raft that he had. Now, my dad was a Navy SEAL. He was also a scuba diver and a swimming instructor at the YMCA. And he's holding this raft. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Raft. And then it hit me. Recognize, accept, feel, trust. The raft technique. I ran back to my computer. The words just flew out of me. I knew exactly what my parents were up to. Everyone can use the raft technique. You need, and this is what I explain in great detail. This is one of the major lessons in my new book, to recognize the presence of spirits. Okay, that one's all right. Accept it as real. Got to get over your skepticism. Feel. Now, this is where people get hung up. Remember that squiggly line with in the mediumship communication? What happens is people start shoving the feeling away, and you begin to say, oh, well, I was just hallucinating. This can't be real. I'm just wanting it. How could this possibly be? And that's where people get jammed up. So feel it. Feel it without fear, and then trust in the message, the raft technique. And raft doesn't just apply to encountering a spiritual presence. It can also be useful when you're engaging in a reading with a medium, but it can also be, and is also, very important for people who have had a near-death experience and they're trying to reflect upon it afterwards. Also, people who are part of a deathbed vision. So the raft technique teaches you how to recognize the presence of spirits, accept the experience as real, feel it without fear, and then trust in the message. And I want to add something here. In this day, there's a lot of craziness going on in the world, as if there hasn't always been. But people are saying they're receiving messages to go and do all these, violent things. A message from the afterlife frequency, a message from God, a message from your loved ones in spirit, however you want to frame it, is not controlling. Nothing spiritual is controlling. Messages from spirits are about love, healing, and resolution. Spiritual messages are never incite anyone to commit acts of anger, bigotry, hatred, or violence. And that's the difference. This now brings us to near-death experiences, deathbed visions, and shared death experiences. An NDE, near-death experience, occurs when a person physically dies and the EMS, electromagnetic soul, separates from the body. The consciousness remains intact. People report shooting through a light, through a tunnel towards a light. And that's because it's a quantum leap. The energy transfers from our dimension to another dimension that has been referred to as the other side. Many reports of it being a beautiful and transcendent realm, people encountering deceased loved ones, a sense of interconnectedness. Well, NDEs have been reported throughout history. And the influence of near-death experiences throughout history has been very profound. Charles Dickens, he was one of the most prolific writers in the Victorian era in England. He was also a student of psychic research, because at this point in Great Britain, spiritualism was kind of the thing. Okay, people go to spirit communication parties, and it started in Britain and also France, the French. That's why terms like clairsavance, clairvoyance, clairaudience, many terms related to spirit communication, of French terminology. And it is very possible that A Christmas Carol may be based on accounts of near-death experiences. And it's not just me who came up with this. Also, Dr. Michael Grasso, Dr. Ken Ring, and Dr. Evelyn Valerino. Think about it. Ebenezer Scrooge. Now, we all know, I'm sure we've all had to go through watching A Christmas Carol. But what happens when he's visited by the three spirits? It is believed that Dickens wrote all of this, not just based on near-death experiences, but also on a component of NDEs known as the life review that people talk about as they leave their body. And all of a sudden, the ghost of Christmas Past. And that this ghost tells and shows Ebenezer what his life was like when he was young. He was actually a pretty decent guy, had a girlfriend, there was love in his life, but then money started becoming his driving force. Ego started becoming his driving force. And that led to the next ghost, which is the ghost of Christmas Present, which essentially showed him what a money-grubbing, miserable, miserly, egocentric person he'd become. And then, of course, we all remember the ghost of Christmases Yet to Come, which show him this horrific ending he has where there's no love, no joy in his life whatsoever. Well, it's very possible that not only was the ghost of Christmas Yet to Come part of the life review, but in about 10 to 15% of reported NDEs, people have what's known as a hellish NDE, where they don't go into a beautiful transcendent realm. And the foremost expert on this is my friend and colleague, Nancy Evans Bush. She's written a number of books on the hellish NDE. The technical term is DNDE, distressing near-death experience. And Nancy is very good about examining it, that it occurs in the NDE zone, but it's not so much you're going into a sulfury fire pit with a guy with a pitchfork sticking in the butt and tormenting you. It's a sense of nothingness, a sense of a void, but there's still this intelligence that you communicate with. And it may be part of your EMS saying, my life needs a turnaround. And it could also be part of a catalyst for you to embrace a more spiritual, a more in-depth, a more understanding life. So I highly recommend anything Nancy has written. Now, on the flip side of the karmic coin, let's throw a coin again to the Newtonian reductionist materialist. Is there a non-spiritual reductionist materialist explanation for near-death experiences? Well, there's several, but the best one in the skeptical arsenal is DMT, dimethyltryptamine. Dimethyltryptamine is a naturally occurring hallucinogenic. And get this, when you're dying, the pineal gland that we talked about earlier secretes DMT. And basically, you give yourself an acid trip. I mean, because what DMT induces is a hallucinogenic state. It also gives the person, having a DMT experience, a floating sensation, and it feels like a spiritual experience. And DMT is not just for people who are dying. It's actually been extracted and synthesized. So there are people who ingest DMT and basically have a hallucinogenic, hallucinatory experience because they think that somehow is going to patch them into a great form of spirituality. So the skeptics say that, well, an NDE is merely a naturally occurring side effect of a dying brain. But here's what DMT does not induce. It does not give people the impression or the sensation of flying through a tunnel into the white light. They do not enter a transcendent realm. They do not have veridical perception. Also, they do not encounter deceased loved ones. Okay, that's a biggie right there. So just because you have an acid trip doesn't mean you're going to see your Aunt Martha who died, 20 years ago. The veridical perception. Now, this has been spoken of a lot, but essentially there's so many accounts of people who, let's say they're being operated on and they die, they flatlined, their consciousness leaves their body, goes down the hall and sees what their family is saying about them, how they're praying, they're crying, and are able to describe this with exact detail. There's one account of a woman who saw herself floating above the operating table, and the next thing she knew, she was above the hospital, and she saw a blue sneaker stuck in a rain gutter. So when she was resuscitated and she's talking about this, the surgeon said, get 2 people up on the roof. Let's just find out. And they sent two orderlies to the roof of the hospital, and exactly where she said it was a blue tennis shoe stuck in the rain gutter. Now, I don't think dropping acid is going to give you that insight. And so this then leads me to Luigi Galvani. Now think about this, 1780, he discovered that if you shock a dead frog's leg, it moves. Now this was a big discovery. Just a few years before, Benjamin Franklin, with his famous kite with the key in the lightning storm, discovered the existence of electricity. So now in 1780, wow, there's something to this electricity. So this Italian scientist, Luigi Galvani, started shocking dead frogs and saying, look at this. And this led to bioelectricity. He discovered bioelectricity, that the electricity generated within an organism, especially by a muscle or nerve. So this means that our nervous system, our neural network, runs and operates through electrical impulses. Well, now let's talk about DMT. Artificial inducement does not recreate the authentic experience. So Galvani could shock a dead frog all day, but it wasn't coming back to life. You can take DMT, and it is not, you can recreate some of these effects of an NDE, but that doesn't mean it is an NDE because you're not recreating the authentic experience. However, this did inspire a lot of creativity, and in 1817 gave Mary Shelley the idea to write Frankenstein. So here we are in our lower, slower vibration of the material world dimension, the higher vibration of the other side dimension, and this brings us to deathbed visions and shared death experiences, which are multiple simultaneous NDEs, and that's a frequency overlap of the electromagnetic soul with the afterlife frequency. Deathbed visions. Those dying may report seeing or hearing dead loved ones, religious, spiritual beings, and or beautiful scenery. My friend and colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Long, who founded the Near-Death Research Foundation, NDERF, which is the largest database of NDEs in the world, said that it explained how these have been reported for centuries. People are dying and they start talking about loved ones in spirit and actually having communications with them. Well, more recently, we've all heard of Steve Jobs, who the founder of Apple Computers. As he lay dying on his deathbed, he was surrounded by family and friends. And he looked up right before he died and said, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow." And the people that were around him, it appeared that he was just awestruck about what he was seeing, and then he expired. Now, in 2020, George Floyd, we've all seen the video. I'm a medium, a NDE researcher, and I'm also a legal analyst. And I watched that video, and as I was watching it, and it's difficult to see, prior to his passing, he said, "Mama, I'm through." After I saw that, I did research on George Floyd, and he was particularly close to his mother. He did call her Mama. Now, to give the skeptics their due, he used to refer occasionally to his girlfriend as Mama. But when I watched that, it looked to me that he was talking and communicating with the spirit of his mother. I'm not trying to create controversy here, but I want to put this out. The George Floyd video very well may be the most heavily documented and viewed deathbed vision in history. A shared death experience is at the time of a person's death. Bystanders and onlookers observe phenomena associated with the energy of a spirit leaving the body, not just relatives and close friends, but nurses, doctors, and other medical personnel. They may see a transparent replica of a dying person leaving the body, describe a feeling of leaving their own bodies and rising to accompany their loved one toward the light, hear beautiful music, apparitions of the deceased person's loved ones, brilliant light filling the room at the time of death. Dr. Raymond Moody still at it in his exploration of shared death experiences. So there's an overlap between a DBV, a deathbed vision, and a shared death experience. And so when people are in close physical proximity to somebody who is dying, who is communicating or seeing spirits of deceased loved ones, people around them may have the same experience. I'm using the same graphic from mediumship because it's the same principle. You have the person dying, the person transitioning, their electromagnetic soul's vibration is leaving the body. Spirits are interfacing with them, and people around that, mediums, non-mediums, healthcare workers, family members, hospice personnel, all get caught up in this energetic link. Ergo, they are observing and temporarily experiencing what the person dying is. So, is there a technology beyond biology for spirit communication? In the 1920s, Thomas Edison, in some of his last interviews, was working on what's known as the spirit phone. He believed he could develop spirit communication technology. More recently, Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona is developing what's known as the soul phone. Unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to discuss what I've seen in Dr. Schwartz's lab, but let me tell you something. But what about in between Edison and Dr. Schwartz? Science hasn't been static. This leads me to, because there's been a lot of technology, and this leads me to a story about the best friend that I ever had. His name is Billy. Here we are in Japan at Kinkakuji, the Golden Temple. We met when we were 11 years old. Our birthdays were a week apart. We went to junior high, high school, college together. After college, I went to law school. He went to Asia, learned to speak Japanese, Cantonese, Indonesian, and Thai. He was a linguistics genius. I went to Asia. We traveled, had so many incredible adventures. In fact, the first chapter of the Afterlife Frequency begins with one of our adventures in Bangkok, a very harrowing experience. But from the time we were in high school, we had this ongoing debate. We had both been raised in the Catholic faith, but he was an atheist. He didn't believe it. Of course, I argued the other side, if you will. And he said, especially when we were in Asia, he was always wondering, because every Buddhist temple, I was there talking to the monks. And he said, Mark, he said, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in an afterlife. I don't believe there's a soul. He said, because science can't prove it. He said, but I can't understand how you do that psychic thing. and so it wasn't a contentious debate. It was an intellectual debate. I mean, he was my best friend. He was a smart guy. Well, I even performed his wedding. He met a beautiful Japanese woman, Yuki. I'm still friends with her. And I was a notary public, and it was one of the greatest honors of my life. I performed the wedding ceremony for my best friend. And then 2 years later, he died from suicide. The problem with Billy, he was always grappling with severe depression. And I'll never forget getting the call from Yuki, and it just broke my heart. Best friend I ever had was in this world, gone. Well, 2 years later, 2 years after he passed, I was asked to speak at a paranormal convention at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. And supposedly there's a lot of paranormal activity, and that's a whole nother talk on its own. And Stanley's beautiful. It's amazing. It's right at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And, I'd given my talk, and then there's a giant conference room. And so all the speakers, there were other mediums there, but there was a lot of guys from the TV ghost hunting shows and all this. And so I'm signing books, and they were also on display. There were a lot of paranormal investigation equipment. Okay. And all of them scan the EM spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum. You got K2 meters, tri-field, spirit box, digital voice, thermal infrared. Well, my manager, Rocky, if anyone that's been to my events, they've met Rocky. She coordinates everything. She's like having 5 people rolled into one. I mean, she's just amazing. And so I'm signing books at my table because my first book, Never Letting Go, had just come out. And so she's walking around because she was real interested in this stuff. And there's a very well-known paranormal investigator named Chris. And she's walking by his table, and he was displaying the spirit box scanner. And supposedly that scans radio waves for looking for spirits' voices. And as she's going by, she hears, "Get Mark." And Rocky stops and said, "What?" And Chris looked at her and he goes, "Did you hear that?" She goes, "Yeah." And it said, "Get Mark" again. And he goes, "Do you think he means your Mark Anthony?" Well, I'm, about 50, 60 feet away. Here I am at this table, and I'm signing books, and I'm hearing, "Mark, get over here." And I look up, and they're waving, and I go, "But I got to get over here right now." So I'm like, oh my gosh. And there's people forming around their table. So I wasn't sure what was going on. And I get up and I run over, to them. And as I walk up, all of a sudden, out of the spirit box, I hear, "Dude." And I stopped in my tracks, and I go, "Oh my God." And Rocky goes, "Mark." And then I hear, "Love you, bro." And it was Billy's voice. And then it filled with static. She goes, "Mark, that was Billy." I go, "I know that was Billy." That was his voice coming out of that machine. And I couldn't believe it. See, we grew up in the surfing culture of East Coast Central Florida. He always called me dude and bro. And I remember when I was leaving Asia, I was at the Bangkok airport, and he came up, hugged me, and goes, "Love you, bro." That was one of the last things he ever said to me. And this device came out of it, and I was stunned. And then I thought, wait a second, this is so Billy. Okay, we had this whole debate our whole lives that the afterlife doesn't exist because science can't prove it. So what did he do? He picked a piece of technology to communicate to me at a time when I least expected it. And that got all the knobs and cogs working in my brain. And that led me partially to write my last book, Evidence of Eternity, because I had to start explaining this in scientific terms. But it really galvanized me to write the Afterlife Frequency, because that experience triggered by Billy through technology led me to the development of the concept of the electromagnetic soul, because we are connected by the light, by electromagnetic energy. It is only a matter of time until our technology can absolutely prove the existence of an afterlife and spirit communication. And we are connected by the light from the cosmic to the subatomic. And that is why we're living in the material world dimension, the other side, the afterlife frequency of the other side dimension, and interdimensional communication, near-death experiences, shared-death experiences, deathbed visions, and after-death communication, the NDE zone. This is where it occurs, this frequency between the two different dimensions. And that is what led me to write my new book, The Afterlife Frequency. And I've been honored that it has been endorsed by the top NDE and afterlife research scientists in the world. I want to thank everyone with the Theosophical Society, and I look forward to seeing you next time and when I'm on tour again. Many blessings.